that is all things Canadian universities. I am beside myself because this is a topic that more and more, I think students are considering Canada as an option. And I have found it very difficult to find sources of information that are accurate and really help move students and parents from this idea of like, should I, to actually taking action. So I was so excited to meet Ian at the HECA event in DC, and we connected right away. And I said, I have to talk to you. So I'm going to let Ian introduce himself. All of this is in the spirit of Emerging's philosophy, which is growing good humans. And in my opinion, the more options and the more access to information that students have, the more they're able to live into their best lives. So that is the spirit of this conversation. And Ian, I'm just going to let you introduce yourself and tell us all about you, and then I'm going to dive into some questions.
Absolutely perfect. Thank you, Laura. Hi, everyone. My name is Ian Camara. I am the International Recruitment Officer at the University of Guelph in Ontario, Canada. I have been working in higher education for just under 5 years now. I did my undergraduate degree in Ontario, and I'm also now pursuing my Master's of Education in Ontario as well. However, just because I'm not an international student does not mean I do not connect with students all over the world. I am very passionate about higher education, international education, and just overall getting students that education, whether it be domestically or internationally, and which is why I connected with Laura at the HECA conference, because I really do hope that some American students are able to come to Canada and study internationally.
Great. I'm going to dive right in because there's so much, and we really start on time and end on time. So, Ian, where do students begin? One of the questions is, how long is the Canadian admissions process? And I do believe it starts a lot later than the United States. And notifications, I believe, are a bit later, which I often has been a little bit of an issue for families applying. But can you just give us like a timeline?
Yeah, of course. So typically, Canadian university admissions on average takes about 9 months. So from September until May or June, depending on the institution. So in Canada, each province has their own website to apply to college or university, whether it be through that online platform, through Common App, which only select few institutions are on. But typically applications open in September, and they're open until the beginning of April, where they would tend to close. So once you apply in September, you would have to submit all of your required documents. So your transcripts. Most institutions take from your freshman year all the way to your senior year transcripts, because a lot of institutions do rolling admissions with and a cumulative GPA. So with rolling admissions, once we receive your application is when we would assess it, as long as we have all the information that we need from you. So once you apply, it could take a few weeks, it could take a few months to hear back from a Canadian institution. I know in the US, once you really start applying in the beginning of September, and then you really instantly hear back right away whether or not you got into the college that you've applied for. It's a little bit slower than that in Canada. It really is a process, and we do like to have as much information from the student as possible in order to assess their application.
That's great. And for most of our students who are applying, if they apply, say, October, November, they don't hear probably until around holiday Christmas time. Some don't find out until April. So we're kind of used to that, depending if you apply early action or early decision. But just to clarify, you're saying that you guys do you have like a release deadline where everybody's notified, or does it just depend on the institution?
So it depends on the institution when the applications open. So
Okay.
For the most part, there is a specific set day. For example, Ontario universities, our applications open near the end of September. I'm not sure exactly what it's like for other provinces and other universities, but that deadline or that date should be listed on the university website.
I know one of the big, I know in applying to Europe, there's a big difference between this idea of like, do you know what you want to study or do you not know what you want to study? And in Europe, you often have to be super clear. Like, this is what I'm majoring in and this is what I want to do. What is it like at your institution and in Canada in general?
Mhm. So again, that varies by institution. So at the University of Guelph, we have bachelor programs and then we have majors associated with those bachelor programs. So students would apply to, let's say, Bachelor of Commerce, which is business, and then on the application, they would select which major they would like to study. So for example, Bachelor of Commerce in marketing or Bachelor of Commerce in accounting, something like that. But again, there could be institutions where you just apply to the program that you want to study, like Bachelor of Business Administration.
Hmm. And is that pretty par for the course that everyone needs to know what they want to study to be able to apply?
Necessarily, no. So you don't really know what you need to study. Um, it is good to have some sort of idea, but because you are able to switch your major, it can be difficult in some ways for some programs, some majors, but for the most part, the university does try and make it an easy process. If you are wanting to switch your major, if you're not really loving what you're studying, if you want to experience something else. I know some people who have changed their major 3 or 4 times in the 4 years that they've been in university. So it is possible to change your major, but for some majors, it is a bit more difficult because of how competitive they could be.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, I mean, listen, as an educational consultant, I have a really hard time with this idea that 17 and 18-year-olds should know what they want to study. And then there's this whole idea of like, okay, well, I have to go to a place where I have to tell them what I'm going to study, and I may or may not be able to change my major and that kind of flexibility. I think Americans have just a different mindset, I think,
Mhm.
than I don't know if it's because I have not I haven't raised I have 4 kids and I didn't raise them in Canada. So it does seem like there's a little bit more emphasis in the high school process on what do you want to do when you grow up. And students are a little bit more channeled into those areas. Would you say, did I catch that correctly?
Yes and no. So in high school in Canada, there's grades 9, 10, 11, and 12. Typically in grade 12, that's when students really start to focus on applying to university and figuring out what they want to do with their lives. They, for the most part, students studying in Ontario and are applying to an Ontario university, we look at their grade 12 marks. But internationally, we look at sometimes all of their high school history. And depending on the program that the student is applying for, we may look at their grade 11 marks or their grade 12 marks or a combination of everything. There are required classes that students need to take in order to be admissible to the program, but for the most part, there's not really an emphasis. It's generally about the same as everywhere else. There's not really an emphasis, but they are starting to figure out what they want to do in grade 11 and grade 12.
Okay, I always say there's no such thing as a silly question, that all questions are good, but sometimes I feel silly in this. But is there like a liberal arts degree where you can just go in and be undecided?
Yeah, so a ton of Canadian institutions have just general degree programs. For example, there could just be like a general undeclared program. So at the University of Guelph, we have Bachelor of Arts undeclared or Bachelor of Engineering undeclared.
Okay.
So that's where you can really go in and explore, take a bunch of different first year courses to see what your interests are, and then you would have to really apply to transfer into a major program.
Got it. Got it. That I think that helps a lot because then people could. And so then this question, like, why Canada? Why Canada at all? Why why choose when there's so many other options?
Yeah, like honestly, I also get that question a lot, but Canada's higher education system is really among the top in the world. It offers a wide range of educational opportunities from diplomas and certificate programs to undergraduate and graduate degree programs. There are a ton of schools to choose from in tuition costs vary depending on the type of use of school that you go to and what type of nationality you are and the program that you're in. But typically for US students, Canadian tuition is a lot cheaper, especially when you take the exchange rate into the consideration. But really, no matter what school you choose to go to or how much it costs, getting a university or college degree in Canada is an investment that will absolutely pay off in years to come. And with studying in Canada, you can continue working in Canada, you can find jobs in Canada, as well as go back to the States and work there. So the degree that you get in Canada is very transferable and you can really work anywhere around the world.
Wow, I don't think I really understood that. Is there an issue with visas or things like that that students need to be aware of?
So if you are a non-Canadian, so if you do not have Canadian citizenship or permanent residency, you will need to apply for a study permit. I unfortunately cannot go into much detail about study permits because it's actually illegal for me to do so. But however, if you are studying as an international student, you will have to apply for a study permit and you will need to receive an offer of admission to the university in order to apply for said study permit.
Okay, so that's kind of part of the timeline, right? You apply to
Mhm.
the university, accepted to the university, and once you're accepted, you apply for a study permit. Is there certain criteria that students need to be aware of? Because I could imagine someone saying to me, well, if I have to get a study permit and I'm not going to get it, why would I spend all this energy applying?
Yeah, so there are a few things that students would need in order to apply for the study permit. Um, First thing first is offer of admission to a Canadian university.
Okay.
The second thing is typically the proper documentation of just proper documentation, which can be found on the Government of Canada website. You'll need proof of acceptance, proof of your identity, valid documents of the student's country, so birth certificate, some things like that. And then another thing that students should be aware of is that they need proof of financial support. So it's
Hmm.
recommended to have at least your tuition fees covered plus an extra $10,000 Canadian, just in case of anything happening.
And is that, uh, how do people do that? They bank accounts or it's the parents do that? How does that happen?
Bank accounts, parents can help. I know a ton of students have education funds that they can use for that as well. Just documentation that students are financially able to move across into another country to study there. So
Okay. Let's go back a little bit. What is the average price of a tuition in
mhm,
Canada?
that is a good question. So typically, again, depending on the university and the program that the student is studying, tuition can range anywhere between $20,000 to $60,000 Canadian per year for international students. Universities also charge additional fees for like administrative costs and student services. So if you take the exchange rate into consideration, it can be anywhere between $15,000 to $30,000 US. So it
Wow.
is substantially cheaper. Again, it is based on the program and the university that you are attending.
What about scholarships?
There's a ton of scholarships that students can be eligible for. Most Canadian institutions have entrance scholarships.
Hmm.
So entrance scholarships are typically based on merit. So the student's GPA coming into university in their first year. They're available if students are starting full-time first-year degree studies at the beginning of the cycle, and scholarships are typically awarded primarily on academic achievement, and sometimes they can be eligible for personal achievement. Bursaries are another type of financial assistance that students can be eligible for, and those are usually awarded based on financial need. One thing that I would like to note, especially for US students, is that pretty much most Canadian universities and colleges do not offer a full scholarship. That's not something that we typically offer. Whether you're an athlete or you have outstanding marks, that is something that majority of Canadian institutions do not offer, which is why we provide all the other scholarships that you can apply for or automatically be eligible for.
Great. One thing I forgot to ask you is housing.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a difference between how housing works in the United States versus how housing works in Canada?
Yeah, so usually at the University of Guelph, I can speak on that. If you are a student coming to the University of Guelph in your first year, and you're not residing in the province of Ontario, you get guaranteed housing. So as long as you apply and submit your deposit for housing, you will receive housing in your first year. Typically, after your first year, students find off-campus housing within the city, within walking distance. However, you can still apply for residence, except it's not, we don't really recommend it because most likely than not, you won't get residence in your second, third, and fourth year. So guaranteed housing in your first year. There's not necessarily guaranteed housing for most Canadian institutions, but they do have priority, especially for international students, because we know you don't really have a place that you can just travel and commute to in a city nearby. So that's why we sort of try and offer as much priority housing for international students.
This is a little bit of a segue, but it's dawning on me. Just curious, like selectivity, students getting in, demonstrated interest, affirmative action. Like, what are you all talking about in Canada around all of these issues that are happening here? And is there advantage in selectivity? I'm sure in the United States, especially for the most elite privileged colleges, the selectivity has gone down so much, and many families are just shocked that they're not getting into these schools that maybe 15 years ago they would have. Now there's this whole affirmative action thing. How is that going to impact? So the whole higher education in the United States is kind of out of whack right now, and it's very stressful time. Sometimes I feel like, as an educational consultant, like, man, I'd rather deal with the beast that I know than the beast that I don't. Meaning, not to say Canada is a beast, but like comfort me in some way that this process would be easier, more joyful. I don't know. Like, give me a sell.
Yeah, of course. So most of the time, Canadian institutions really only look at your grades. So that is a big difference between the two countries because, again, Canadian universities mostly focus on grades, where colleges in the US may require essays, recommendations, or really any other supplemental material that's non-academic, like extracurricular activities or recommendations from teachers or employers. So in Canada, it is mostly grades-based. If you have a high GPA, typically around 3.0 or higher, you have a very good chance of being accepted into a Canadian university. More competitive programs will require a high GPA, but that is just common knowledge. Unlike US colleges where SAT or ACT scores are required, they are most of the time optional for students to submit. Institutions like the University of Guelph will only use the scores if they are in the benefit of the student to make their application stronger. So if a student applies to a program and they just fall short, and they submit their SAT score or ACT score, if it's over a certain grade, we will look at it, and if it improves their overall GPA, we will use that. If it doesn't, we won't take a look at it, and it won't have any impact on the student either.
Great.
So,
oh, sorry.
I was just going to say that it doesn't hurt to submit the scores, but again, if you feel like you're not going to have a great score, I wouldn't bother submitting the SAT scores.
What is your advice for students who are, I can imagine people being pretty excited about this possibility, and you did a good job of talking me talking me, there's no demonstrated interest, there's not 700 essays, they're not like you have to have saved children in Africa and started a full-time business. Like you can just kind of be a kid and work hard in school and bumble around and be a teenager and then apply to a Canadian school, pay less money. Housing, sounds like they have preference, but many colleges do require first year, I mean, do promise first year housing, and students are on their own after that anyway.
Mhm.
So how do students go visit? Like, what's the strategy? Do you guys ever do fly-ins? Is there anything like that to take advantage of?
Yeah, some institutions do fly-ins. They do have a fly-in program. A lot of other institutions, they don't necessarily have a fly-in program. It is more on the onus of the student to come and visit. But if they do reach out to someone in the recruitment department, so if someone reaches out to me and says, I would like to have a campus tour and talk to someone about admissions at your university, they will more likely than not set something up. Um, if the student is very keen and has great grades and but is not able to necessarily pay for a flight in, it is up to the discretion of the university whether or not they would like to pay for that student's flight to come and visit. But for the most part, it is on the onus of the student to do so, to come for a visit of the campus.
Great. What do students do for fun on Canadian campuses?
That is a great question. And again, it depends on the city and the university that you're at. But there are a lot of on campus and off campus events, either held by the university's students' union or by local places around the area. So there's never not anything to do, especially if you're in a big city like Toronto or Vancouver. There's always something to do. And there's great transportation to get you to and from those cities. The University of Guelph is about an hour drive west of Toronto, and we have public transportation that goes directly to downtown Toronto, direct right from campus center. So it is very easy and accessible to get to larger cities like that if you are wanting to go to a concert, a sports game, or really just go and explore and go shopping that day.
That's fun. Are there fraternities and sororities in Canadian campuses?
Yes and no. None that are run or sort of governed by the university. Is more so if the student wants to start a fraternity or sorority, it's up to them to manage and maintain everything. But it is not like the US where it is a huge Greek life and everything like that. It is very much run by students and not to the extent of the wildness that can be a fraternity or sorority.
Yeah. What about campus transportation as far as like, are there some campuses that like, there's a lot of biking, people bring their bikes to school, outdoors engagement? Are there some, can talk to me a little bit about that? We, especially in Colorado, I mean, listen, lots of people are going to be watching or listening to this podcast from all over, but just to be selfish, I have students who are like, I just want to be somewhere like Colorado where I can be outdoors and be engaged in that. Are there campuses that you like? Is your campus one of those campuses?
Yes. So actually, the University of Guelph has about, I want to say, 500-acre woods
Wow.
connected to the university, which we use for a lot of our programs. We are a very agriculture-based program, so a lot of our like plant science and food science and biology programs do have a lot of experiential learning in the woods that we have. And there's also a ton of biking, hiking, running trails around the city. And you can find those really anywhere, especially in medium to smaller size universities. Larger universities in bigger cities like Toronto or Vancouver may be a bit more difficult, but they still do have some type of outdoor activity that students can take part in.
That's great. do you want to showcase your college a little more? Like tell us more?
Yeah, absolutely. So the University of Guelph is a mid-sized university in the downtown area of Guelph. We are one of Canada's top comprehensive universities. We have programs ranging from business, engineering, computer science, and with that, we have about 85 majors within 14 degree programs. The University of Guelph is home to more than 1,800 international students from nearly 140 countries,
Yeah.
which often commends the institution's learning and living environments, accessible faculty, and student support services. Like I was mentioning earlier, Guelph boasts a beautiful campus of historical and modern buildings and red brick walkways, and many first years choose to live in student housing because of how accessible and how we guarantee residents. We have one of the top dollars in scholarship and research funds that have been awarded to a Canadian university, and our extensive co-op education options and various experiential learning opportunities are really considered invaluable to many students. So we do have one of the top co-op programs and experiential learning programs that are integrated in some of the majors that we offer. And as I also was mentioning earlier, we are located about 1 hour from Toronto and I really do like to say that Guelph offers the comfort of small community living with the excitement of an international metropolis at
Mm.
its doorsteps. So it's characterized by its 19th century buildings, parks, shops, coffee houses, and restaurants, and all really easily accessible from the university. The University of Guelph really does improve life by focusing on the whole person to shape better citizens of the world. We thrive and strive on inclusivity, global awareness, mindfulness, community, resilience, and these are all just the qualities we nurture and celebrate from the day you as a student arrive to the University of Guelph to your life as an alumni.
Wow. Do you have fly-ins for consultants? Because I just looked it up on the, I mean, I've looked at it before, but I'm like, I did the photo instead of just looking at the website, I did the photos.
Mhm.
Did all the photos. Wow. Amazing.
We do have a very beautiful campus. It looks like you're walking through a park, to be honest, when
Wow.
you're on campus. So it
That's
is a
amazing.
beautiful campus.
Wow. Well, that 30 minutes went by really fast.
Yes,
Is
it
there
did.
anything else you want my people to know? And is there, if people are interested, is it just maybe we can do a follow up and just have your contact information if there's any
Mhm.
families or ed consultants who want to connect with you personally, we can just add that into our social media stuff to contact you. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, yes.
Great. Any last words?
Um, all I want to say is thank you, Laura, for allowing me to join your Ask Me Anything. And I hope that this session was filled with a ton of great information for students, for parents, families, other IECs. And if you do have questions, do not hesitate to reach out. I am considered an expert in the field at the University of Guelph. So like you said, no question is silly. So I'm more than happy to help.
That's awesome. Well, I'm planning. Let's get together in Baltimore at NACAC.
Yes.
I'll have to look up and see where your table is, and you can come see where my table is, and we can
Yes.
maybe have a meal and talk more. So I'm grateful. Thank you so much for your time and your service.
Thank you very much, Laura.
Okay, thank you. Talk to you later.
Okay.
All right. Bye, everybody.